Are we so grateful for the people that lead us in worship? Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's turn to Him for whom we are most thankful, our Lord who gave us His Word. Would you take your Bibles with me and turn in them to Exodus chapter 23? And if you would, please stand with me as I read. For this morning's reading, we'll be reading from Exodus chapter 23 and specifically verses 10 through 19. Exodus chapter 23, verse 10 through 19. Please follow along with me as I read. For 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its yield. But the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave the beasts of the field may eat. You shall do likewise with your vineyard and with your olive orchard. 6 days you shall do your work, but on the 7th day you shall rest, that your ox and your donkey may have rest, and the son of your servant woman and the alien may be refreshed. Pay attention to all that I have said to you, and make no mention of the names of other gods, nor let it be heard on your lips. 3 times in the year you shall keep a feast to me. You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. As I commanded you, you shall eat unleavened bread for 7 days at the appointed time in the month of Abib. For in it you came out of Egypt. None shall appear before me empty-handed. You shall keep the feast of harvest, of the first fruits of your labor, of what you sow in the field. You shall keep the feast of ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in from the field the fruit of your labor. 3 times in the year shall all your males appear before the Lord God. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with anything leavened, or let the fat of my feast remain until morning. The best of the first fruits of your ground you shall bring into the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. May the Lord add His blessing this morning to the reading of His word. You may be seated. I want to remind you this morning that we are in what's called the Book of Covenant. That follows the 10 Commandments. So the 10 words is what Exodus calls them. Just 10 words. Now, the commandments themselves were more than one word, but the idea there is that it's a very succinct thought, a very small, succinct thought that has vast implications, which is why the 10 words go into the Book of Covenant, the Book of Covenant, where it's filled with 6 meditations on 6, or I'll argue 5, of the 10 Commandments here very shortly. But the reason I tell you this is because this is a tough portion of Scripture that's very easily skipped over. But we mustn't do that. We need to take our time in the Book of Covenant to understand who God is, what He's about. So our prayer through this study is with the psalmist in 119, verse 18, "Open my eyes that I may behold wondrous things out of your law." And there's a reason why the psalmist prays this. Because it takes God's blessing to see and understand His law rightly. This isn't written easily. It's written in a way like narrative art that you have to dig in. You have to chew. If you rake, you get leaves. If you dig, you get diamonds. And the law is filled with diamonds, but it takes digging. Why? Because Proverbs 25:2 says, "It is the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings is to search things out." So we want to be kings and queens this morning, and we want to look into the Book of Covenant. We want to look into God's law, and we want to say, what in the world does not boiling a kid in its mother's milk have anything to do with the harvests and the Sabbath and the feasts? What do these all have to do with one another? That takes work. It takes discipline. But if you're up for the challenge, by God's grace, I will walk you through it to see the glory of God that He conceals in His law. Wondrous things. So, this is the brief outline for this morning. My clicker may have stopped working. Did it stop working? Oh, by the way, this is, Jeff's not here this morning. This is from Jeff Phillips. He texted me this week. Actual photo of your pastor trying to cram all the wonderful biblical insight from his studies into a 30-minute sermon. Now, of course, Jeff was wrong. It's not 30 minutes. All right. Outline. Prominence of rest, times of rest, person of rest. This is the outline we're going to follow for this morning's message before communion. The prominence of rest in the Scriptures, the times of rest in the Scriptures, and the person of rest in the Scriptures. Let's go. All right. You've seen this before. For those of you that have been here, those who are visiting, this is a picture of the 10 words, as it were, as Exodus calls them. Now, what the 10 words are followed with is what I refer to as the Book of Covenant, which is a series, I would argue, a sampling of meditations on 5 of the 10 words. Okay? Now, the first one is a meditation on slavery. Now, Israel has just come out of Egypt from being slaves. He introduces the 10 words by saying, I am the God who rescued you out of slavery, out of the harsh treatment of the Egyptians. And so this first meditation is where the 10 commandments are introduced. It's how he opens up the 10 words. I'm the God who saved you out of slavery. So that has a lot to do with slavery, of course. And then he has a meditation on slavery. But the very first thing he says about how to handle your servants when you get into the land of Canaan, it was a redemption thing. It wasn't a slavery thing. It was redeeming people out of a destitute situation. The first thing he tells them is that in the 7th year, you're to release your servants. So the first meditation has to do with slaves, but really it has to do with Sabbath, because the very first thing he tells them about their servants is that in the 7th year, they're free, they're released. It's not, your servants are not like you were a servant in Egypt. This is a very different program. I have you have servants to educate them how to live life and not go bankrupt. I don't have you enslave them like Egypt enslaved you. That's worthy of capital punishment. That's when you steal someone's life as their slave, like Americans did, when you do that, it's worthy of capital punishment. My system of servanthood is when someone goes bankrupt, you take them into your house for 6 years, you educate them on how to work, then you bless them liberally when they leave, so that like a microloan, so they could start their new life. That's what servanthood looks. So for me, servanthood is rest, actually. It's teaching you how to rest. So different. So the first meditation is on slavery, but really it's on Sabbath. The second, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. Murder's on the 6th. Stealing has to do with the 8th commandment, or the 8th word. Adultery in 22:18-31 has to do with the 7th. Falsehood, of course, has to do with you shouldn't have falsehood against your neighbor. And then the one we're on this morning is a meditation on the Sabbath. And so what you see here is that the Book of Covenant, right after the 10 words, opens with a meditation on Sabbath and closes with a meditation on Sabbath. So what you have is when God decides how to meditate on the 10 words with 6 meditations, he opens with the meditation on Sabbath, he closes with the meditation on Sabbath, and the point is that all of my commands are what to you? They're rest to you. That I brought you out of the harshness of slave labor in Egypt to bring you into rest. And not just a land of rest, but a moral, spiritual rest. Rest in every imaginable form. This is the big shift in Exodus. Out of slavery into rest. This is the prominence of rest in the book of covenant going to the 10 words. The prominence of rest didn't start here. It started in Genesis 1 and 2, where the seventh day is the only day that's blessed by God. The seventh day is the only day that's called holy. The seventh day is the only day that doesn't have an ending formula, and there was evening and there was morning, the blank day. The seventh day doesn't have that, which is to say that God's rest of the seventh day is hovering above all of us right now if we choose to enter into it. It is available. It's available. That day never ended. And as if that wasn't enough, God's name Elohim is mentioned 35 times, 7 times 5, and God said is 7 times. Heavens and earth are 21, all derivatives of 7. 7 is everywhere. The prominence of rest is all throughout the Bible. This is such an important understanding for us, but it doesn't stop there. So, he enters into what is now times of rest. What we see here before us in our passage in Exodus 23, 10 to 19. So, rest is so important. The seventh day is so vastly important that he actually imprints it on your personal calendar. I don't know about you. We have a family calendar. It's on the fridge. Becky takes great care to be the only person that writes on that calendar because she's very particular in her handwriting. And every once in a while, the kids will write their birthday on it, and it really irks her. You know, it's like, you don't write neatly like I will do that. I'll leave it to me. So it's like this sacred family calendar. Well, Israel had that. God made it for them. And I want you to notice how intently he crafts their calendar to help them understand the significance of day 7, the significance of rest, of ceasing. So, it starts with the sabbatical year. Now, the men who were at men's prayer breakfast, I'm just going to say, whenever I ask a question, the rest of the church this morning doesn't need to answer it because all the men who were at men's prayer breakfast got a precursor to the study this morning. So it's all on you guys. You're educated. You had the introduction to this morning yesterday. So you leave it to them to answer. You're all off the hook. You can rest. So, sabbatical year. What was it, man? What number year? All right, thank you. The 7th year. The 7th year, and let me just go back to that a second. 7th year, you let the fields lie fallow, specifically so that the poor could eat freely. And then after the poor, what they didn't eat, the wild animals can eat. So you really see an Adamic situation here where Adam was to care for humanity and the animals and the ground. You see it wrapped up in the 7th year. Okay. Then you have the Sabbath. Men, what was the Sabbath? The 7th day of the week. So it wasn't just the 7th year. This was an every week experience that on the 7th day you were to cease from your labor. You look through the Old Testament law and only like the really, really bad crimes are worthy of capital punishment. Guess what? You break Sabbath, capital punishment. Normally it was reserved for the most heinous crimes. The things that would make you wince. You don't want to hear it. Sabbath breaking, capital crime. Huge to God. You break his Sabbath. Your Sabbath. Feast of Unleavened Bread. Man, what was significant about this? No. It lasted 7 days. It was in the month of Abib. Do you know when Abib was in the Hebrew calendar? Right now. Yes. It was somewhere between mid-March and the beginning of April. It's actually right now. Isn't this a way better New Year than January 1st? Right? I mean, it makes so much more sense. It's beautiful, right? So, in the month of Passover, in the first month of the year, when they were to celebrate their new birth as a nation, they were to celebrate Passover. And they were to do that for 7 days. So the seventh year, the seventh day of the week, 7 days of the first feast, okay? And Passover was at the end of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. They were combined. The Feast of Harvest. Now, the feast, I'm not going to ask the men because it would be too complicated of an answer to hear everybody shout it out. The Feast of the Harvest was calculated this way. You ready? The day after the celebration of Passover, which would have been on the Sabbath, which would have been a Saturday, the day after this, now this feast that I'm about to tell you isn't in here, it comes later, but it was the Feast of First Fruits. And what you did there is that after you had the Feast of Unleavened Bread and Passover for 7 days, the day following Sabbath, which would be in the Hebrew week, what? What's the day that followed Sabbath? Sunday, right? Because Sabbath was Saturday. So Sunday would be the first day of the week for the Hebrew. After Passover, after the Feast of Unleavened Bread, on that following Sunday, they would go out to their fields. They would pick the very first of the harvest of that time, and they would go and they'd bring it to the priest, and he'd wave it before the Lord, okay? That was the celebration of first fruits, okay? And that meant that a lot more was going to come. All right? So, on that day, on that Sunday, you would start counting 7 sevens to get to the Feast of Harvest. Okay? So, it would be 7 weeks. You count 49 days. On the 50th day, you would have the Feast of Harvest, where the first fruits began to come in multitude. Okay? It was like not the full harvest, but the first fruits of the harvest in a way that you could use them especially, okay? So, you've got the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The day after the Feast of Unleavened Bread, you start counting 7 sevens, and then you get to the Feast of Harvest, and you celebrate that. Then you get to the Feast of Ingathering. Now, this is an easy one, man. Which was this one? You celebrate this one on the 7th month. Okay, that would have been October-ish in the Hebrew calendar, okay? This is the full harvest. This was the biggest party. This had the most sacrifices. It was an all-out party. Rejoice. It was commanded in the Lord, okay? So, let's just do a quick recap. The sabbatical year was what number? The Sabbath was which day? The Feast of Unleavened Bread was how many days? The Feast of Harvest went how many sevens? And the Feast of Ingathering was on which month? And I could go more. Because the amount of sacrifices you're supposed to sacrifice on these different events had 7 all over the place. Guys, God cares so much about day 7 that He impresses it as the bookends of the Book of Covenant, as the day that has no end, as the only day that's blessed, the only day that's holy. All the numbers in Genesis 1 are pointing to day 7. Think about this. What's the first full day that Adam experienced? He was made on the 6th. His first full day was the 7th day. Eve's too. Sabbath, living in the strength of God by living in the rest of God. This is the idea, and He educates Adam with how to do that in his very first moments. He says, go and name all the animals, and he goes, and he sees that they all have a corresponding partner, but he doesn't. He's sad about that, and so God does what to him? Puts him to rest. He puts him to sleep, and He makes Eve. Abraham is so concerned about how he's going to have an heir, and God promised him an heir, but at this point he's going to have to give it to his servant. What am I going to do, God? And He says, I'll make covenant with you. You get the covenant prepared. You cut covenant. Abraham does it. He's ready to walk through the beasts with God, and what does God do? Hey, Abraham, aren't you a little sleepy? He puts him to sleep. Jacob gets covenant confirmed when he's fast asleep with his stone near a rock or on a rock. however you interpret it. The great things of God happen to man while he is asleep. Passover happens at night. Rest, rest, rest. So this is the idea. Now, when you look at these things, I want to make a few important points about this. We've got three observations primarily. There's an interconnection of ascension, an interconnection between the feasts and an ascension to the feast. You see that they're all connected. The first one is the first month of the year, but to get ready for the next one, you wave the first fruits right after the Feast of Unleavened Bread, so they're together. And the first fruits are a sign of the coming harvest, so that's connected. And then the harvest, the initial harvest, is connected to the huge harvest, so they're all interconnected. There's no ceasing of enjoying God. Do you see? There's no ceasing of enjoying the rest of God. You are to live in the rest of God. But then there's an ascendancy to the joy of these feasts. The first feast has no leaven in it. It's a week of no leaven. Do you really? People tell us when they visit the church, man, your bread is so good. I've been, our church, blah, 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 and Jeannie Kropp is the blessing of it. But do you want to eat this all the time? You're not going to hurt Jeannie's feelings. No, we don't want to eat this all the time. Not having leavened bread is not the best thing in the world. Well, at the Feast of the Harvest, you know what was part of it? That you brought leavened bread before the Lord. So is leavened bread a little bit better than unleavened? Yeah. So in other words, there's a joy that's getting better and better and better. Then you get to the all-out harvest. He says, bring everything. Bring your strong drink. Bring it all. Enjoy this feast. So there's an ascendancy of joy at the feast. Just like we are now in the process of having an ascendancy of joy until we meet Christ. But you should be, as a Christian, you should become more joyful, not less. If that process is reversed, you don't understand Christianity. So this is the deal. There's an ascendancy to joy. But trust is involved throughout this meditation. Listen. Think about the sabbatical year, okay? Where you let your fields lie fallow for the entire year. Could you not have given a portion of your field a break at a time each year for 7 years? Just think about that for a second. Say, okay, I'm going to mark out this plot, and I'm going to start its 7-year break, but I'm still going to use this side, right? Couldn't you do that? But instead, God says, no, you harvest it for 6, and then an entire 7th year, you don't. Does that involve trust? Yeah, he said he'd give them enough in the 6th to get them through the 7th, and even into the 8th until the harvest. But that involves trust. Does giving your animals a break every week, and servants, and foreigners, does that require an amount of trust? When you look at our nation, this whole thing about cloning and all this sort of stuff is at rapid pace, and DNA modification on infants, and all this sort of stuff. Do you know that other nations are doing that because they don't have near the protocols that we do on not interfering with that section of life, right? And do you know one of the arguments of American scientists to get into that is this? They're doing it, and it could get them more advanced than us, and we're going to be behind, and then we're not going to be the superpower anymore, right? So, just like this, if Israel looked at themselves as the nation, if we don't work for a whole year, if we take a day off the other nation, do you see how in the mind that involved a degree of trust, right? Okay? And then you get into the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and it's that feast that God says, you have to bring something. Don't come empty-handed. But the Feast of Unleavened Bread was at the very beginning of the year. You were to bring green stuff, it says. In other words, it's not fully ripe, potentially. In other words, the Feast of Unleavened Bread is when you saved your food from the previous full harvest, and you're getting into the Feast of Unleavened Bread. I don't have much to bring. I might have to bring stuff from last year. This is the time where lambs are reproducing, but it's the first of the lambs, and I really want those lambs. I don't want to bring them to God. This is the time, it's like you go to a restaurant and there's like $1 bill on the wall, right? Or $100 bill on the wall, and that's the first money they came. Well, that might have been hard for them to put in a frame, right? Because they need that to get their business started, as it were. The Feast of Unleavened Bread required a great amount of trust in God to bring the best of what they had at the beginning of the year. The Feast of Harvest was very similar. It was the first big harvest. And to bring the best of what you had to God during that first harvest may have been difficult. And then the Feast of Ingathering was the best part of the year. And to bring a load of sacrifices and to bring the very best of the best involved trust. 23:19 says, the best of the first fruits of your ground you shall bring into the house of the Lord your God. Now, what does boiling a kid in its mother's milk have to do with such a passage? Well, this command, you should know, is mentioned, guess how many times in the law? I got you on 7, so you're going to guess 7. No, it's not 7. 3. That's an important command to be mentioned 3 times in the law. Why is this so important? Well, here's the idea. In all of these feasts and all of these times on the calendar, God was saying, I'm giving you rest, and here's what rest looks like. Here's what I want it to look like. A year of no produce, a day of the week, these 3 feasts bringing the very best you have. This is the fields, the herds. They are my nourishment to you. They are like a mother's milk for her baby. They're my nourishment. The field, the ground, all the animals, all of this stuff is my nectar for you. It's my breast milk, as it were. It is to bring you up and to take care of you. Just like a mother's milk for the kid is to raise up that kid. Don't take that which is to raise you up and murder your kids with it. That's the essence of it. Don't take my land. Don't mistreat the milk that I'm giving you, the milk and honey of the land. Don't misuse the milk to murder yourselves, to specifically your kids. If you handle my fields wrong, my animals, the servants you have, if you mishandle that stuff, you are boiling your children in the milk I gave you. Okay? You're taking that which was meant to bring life and you're murdering your kids if you do these things wrong. If you handle my Sabbaths, my feasts wrong, you're destroying the next generation. Okay? That's why this verse is here. Don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. Don't do that. It's abominable to take that which brings life and bring death through it. What brings life for Israel? The land, the animals, all of it. That's why he says, bring the first fruits, bring the best of, bring the milk, bring the very best of what I'm giving you. Give the land rest. Don't take your nourishment and use it to kill you. You say, well, how did that happen? How would that happen? Well, let's take a look how Israel handled this. I'm going to show you 3 texts. Sabbatical year. What was the sabbatical year? Taking the 7th year off for the land and the poor and the animals. 2 Chronicles, looking at Israel's history. He took into Babylon those who had escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him and to his sons until the establishment of the king of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed its, say it, all the days that it lay desolate, it kept to fulfill 70 years, which means that for 490 years, Israel did not keep the sabbatical year. 490 years, they raped the land, and they did what America wants to do, and all this sort of stuff. We got to say, hey, we can't trust God for an entire year. You nuts? 70 times they didn't keep Sabbath for a period of 490 years. If you do the math of Israel, they kept it for around 319 years. Those sevens in the midst of 319. So they didn't keep it much longer than they kept it. So that's Sabbath. Passover. And Josiah commanded all the people. Remember, Josiah discovers the law, or someone discovers the law, brings it to Josiah, rips his clothes. Why? Nobody's been doing anything in it, right? And Josiah commanded all the people, keep the Passover to the Lord your God, as it is written in the book of covenant. For no such Passover had been kept since the time of the judges who judged Israel, or during all the days of the kings of Israel, or the kings of Judah. Nobody kept Passover. Ingathering, time of Nehemiah. Come back from Babylon. All the assembly of those who had returned from the captivity made booths. The ingathering was also, another name by it was the Feast of Booths, okay? Made booths and lived in the booths. For from the days of Joshua, the son of Nun, to that day, the people of Israel had not done so. This is the banger. This is the huge celebration. Joshua dies, nobody does it. What did they do? They cooked their kids in the milk. They took that which was meant to bless, and they used it to kill their kids. That's what they did. They took the nourishment, they took the milk and honey, and by not treating it rightly, it destroyed the next generation. So, is it any wonder that at the time where Babylon starts capturing and conquering Israel, Judah specifically, what do you find happen? And I will make them eat the flesh of their sons and their daughters. And everyone shall eat the flesh of his neighbor in the siege and in the distress with which their enemies and those who seek their life will afflict them. Lamentations, where Jeremiah says what happened. The hands of compassionate women have boiled their own children. They became their food during the destruction of the daughter of my people. Why are they going into captivity? Because they didn't keep the sabbatical year. 70 years, he's going to let his land rest as it should. So what do the moms end up doing? Guys, this is stuff that makes your head look down in shame. They boil their babies. Why is this command following Sabbath, sabbatical year? Because to mistreat the nourishment brings about the murder of the next generation. To mistreat God's blessing murders the next generation. That's what it does. And this is case in point, literally, of what happens. Friends, this is huge. Rest is a thing you don't mistreat. But this is not who God likes to be. He doesn't like this. He doesn't laugh at this. He doesn't get pleasure in this. In fact, in the very same book, it's in our reading for gentle and lowly today. Lamentations 31 to 33. But the Lord does not cast off forever. But though he cause grief, he will have compassion according to the abundance of his steadfast love. For he does not afflict from his heart or grieve the children of men. In other words, afflicting, as Dane Orland points out, afflicting comes, if he can say, unnaturally from God. He doesn't like to afflict. It's the most unnatural thing. Blessing is way natural to God. He loves to bless. He loves to shower blessing upon his kids. But he will afflict in love to teach you never, ever, ever walk away from his rest. So I'm just going to stop a second before we go into the person of rest and say, how is it that you and I walk away from rest? What qualifies you to God? What do you look to? My best friend Reed sent me a clip by Pastor Alistair Begg recently, and he was saying, if we neglect the gospel, we will very easily slip into a works righteousness mindset. He says, if someone asks you the famous question, what is it that makes you right with God the Father? And he says, and you begin answering that question in the first person, you've immediately gone wrong. Well, I did this. I did that. There was a time when I did this. He said, only if you answer that question in the third person. Is it third? I'm messed up on my person. He did this. He did that. He did this. Jesus did this. And that's why I can be right with you. So how are you answering the question, how am I right with God this morning? If your first answer is, you've gone wrong. Jesus is the right answer. He did this. He did this, and because of that, I am right with him. So that's that's the most significant way to slip the rest of God. But there's sub ways to skip the rest of God and skip out on it. What does Jesus say to the people in Matthew 6? He says, people that are worrying about food and clothing and all the like. He says, don't the Gentiles worry about those things? Who are the Gentiles? They're the ones that don't have a father-son, daughter-father relationship with God, right? He says, so if you live with carrying all the weight on yourself, then you're just like people who don't know God. And I nearly weep with some of what you guys are going with this morning. This is heavy stuff that comes at us, right? In a fallen world. To our family, it's hard stuff. But Jesus says there's a way to handle that in a way that's like a son, like a daughter. We weep, but we don't weep as those who have no hope when our brothers and sisters die. So there's weeping. Don't think there's not weeping. But there's a weep that has a floor. It's not emptiness. It's not a chasm. And so there's stress. There's stuff that comes, but we're crushed on all sides. We're distressed, but we're not destroyed, Paul says. We're afflicted, but we're not destroyed. We're brought low, but we're not crushed. We're sorrowful, but yet we're always rejoicing. I know what it is to be with much, and I know what it is to be without, and to have a contentment in all things. There's a peace that passes all understanding. And I see that in those that are struggling. Friends, this is just a little glimpse of what it's like to miss the rest of God. The word there for going up, the men shall go up, that he commands them to go, it says to feet. And so it's kind of like you're going to come up and get the elements in a little bit. To feet, you start walking. And so it was a pilgrimage to Jerusalem when they conquered the land. And Psalms 120 to 134 are called the Psalms of Ascent. Those are likely the Psalms that they chanted as they went up to Jerusalem. It was a hike, and the men went, but that implies bring your families if they're able. You know, you might have a pregnant wife or just give birth, so she couldn't make it, but if she could, everybody was to go. And you were to feet. And this is something that we especially need right now in the aftermath of COVID, where a lot of churches were online, for better or for worse, right? Because it can be real easy to watch online and convenient. But listen, to feet is to be shoulder to shoulder, is it not? To be with people. That's the idea. Why? Why is it? Why is it to be together in this sort of context? Because heaven, the celebration that's going on in heaven, which is the Feast of Ingathering, the huge feast, is meant to be imprinted like a mirror on earth. This is our festal gathering. It's supposed to mirror heavens. And so we're meant to be rejoicing together, like Daniel clapping up here and stomping his foot. This is a heavenly imprint on earth, which requires shoulder to shoulder interaction. That's the idea. So slipping this is slipping your way to understand true rest and true celebration and true nourishment. And to do that, men, is to boil your kids in the nourishment. This is blessing of God, where we bring our first fruits to the Lord. This is our moment. And to miss that, you really, I want to use a crass word, the next generation. So, these are just a few ways we miss rest. We mess up our salvation by thinking it's us, that we live anxious lives by thinking it waits on us, and by missing times of fellowship and gathering that are meant. This is the feast for us. But let's close with looking at the person of rest. Do you know that one of the celebrations that will be coming up is it wasn't just the 7th year that you took a break, right? That's when debts were forgiven and servants could go free, and you let the field relax and the animals and everything. But there was another year that was the 7th year. So 7 years times 7 years is 49 years. And then after that, it was what's called the year of Jubilee. And that's when people got their land back. That's when the poor were like seriously reinstated. They had went bankrupt. They had to sell their land. They became indentured. They still haven't been able to pay back their land, but they really want their land back. The year of Jubilee was like the top of the top of the top. It was the big deal. And what does Jesus say when he goes to the synagogue and opens the scroll to Isaiah 61? The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. You're getting your land back. This is all new for you. Your kids, the next generation. You squandering your wealth can stop with you, and your kids can have an inheritance. Good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, and set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. So Jesus is the year of Jubilee. But it goes way further. Jesus is crucified the week of Passover, and unleavened bread. Okay? He is our Passover lamb, Paul will call him. He'll say to remove the leaven. This is very significant that you remove the leaven of Egypt when you leave Egypt, but then you start your leaven cakes all over again. And then at the Feast of Harvest, you wave your leaven. In other words, I've cut the leaven off of Egypt, but now I want you to start growing a new leaven. So Paul will say, get rid of the old leaven because Jesus is our Passover lamb. So this is Jesus. He's crucified the week of Passover. Oh, and by the way, so he's crucified on Friday, right? Which day did Jesus rest in the tomb? On the seventh day. Okay? And then, which day did Jesus raise from the tomb? The day after Sabbath, which is Sunday. And what was the day that you were supposed to do that after this feast? You were just supposed to take the very first fruits and what? Wave them before the Lord that a harvest is coming, begun, yeah. So he's resurrected after Sabbath when the first fruits were waved. And then you count 49 days, which is harvest. You know another name for that festival? Pentecost. Have you ever heard of the chapter Acts 2? So, Jesus is the first fruits of the resurrection. You gather in the harvest at the Feast of Pentecost. He gathers in the harvest of people from every tribe, nation, and tongue at Pentecost. But all of this is waiting for the ingathering at the final. Remember, he tells parables of there's a day coming when I'll return, my Father will come, and he'll gather in the wheat and he'll burn away the weeds. Remember? Look, I tell you, lift up your eyes and see that the fields are white for harvest. This is the time we're in right now. We are in the time between the Feast of Harvest and the Feast of Ingathering. Jesus is the first fruits. Acts 2 is Feast of Harvest, Pentecost. We're now waiting for the final ingathering. And this is Jesus' word to you, to us. Lift up your eyes and see that the fields are white for harvest. Already the one who reaps is receiving wages and gathering fruit for eternal life, so that the sower and the reaper may rejoice together. So let's rejoice together in opening our mouths with the gospel of Jesus Christ, so that our neighbors around us are ready for the feast of ingathering. Amen? So friends, this is the big picture of the Sabbath. We are to image forth God by living in His rest. And Jesus is our rest. Hebrews 3 says Jesus is our rest. He is the rest. So if you neglect to enter that rest, you're going to be kept out of it. Just like Israel was, when they were kept out of the land of Canaan and had to wander, and ultimately never really entered by the way they kept the feasts or didn't keep the feasts. And so, if you want to enter God's rest, the doorway is Jesus Christ. He is your rest. Looking to Him, you will find rest for your souls. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, I'll give you rest. My yoke's easy. My burden is light. I want to close with reading to you a quote from the questions for tonight from the small groups, from Ortland's book. It's in your bulletins. If you got a bulletin with the questions in it there, it's on the flip side of the page. He says this: the Christian life, from one angle, is the long journey of letting our natural assumption about who God is over many decades fall away, being slowly replaced with God's own insistence on who He is. He doesn't delight in afflicting. He delights in blessing. This is hard work. It takes lots of sermons and a lot of suffering to believe that God's deepest heart is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, 490 years. And beyond, he waited before captivity. The fall in Genesis 3 not only sent us into condemnation and exile, the fall also entrenched in our minds dark thoughts of God, thoughts that are only dug out over multiple exposures to the gospel over many years. Perhaps Satan's greatest victory in your life today is not the sin in which you regularly indulge, but the dark thoughts of God's heart that caused you to go there in the first place and keep you cool in the wake of it. Friends, I've told you the story about a family that adopted a young boy from a third world nation. And they brought him in to their home, and they noticed that at the first meal, he left the table with a piece of bread from the meal. And the husband and wife looked at each other, and they're kind of like, should we tell him not to do that or what, you know? And they just said, let's just let it ride. And so they give him a bath. Well, he takes it in the bathtub. And they put him to bed, and this soggy piece of bread is going to bed with him. And they said he did that routinely. At every meal, he takes something from the table with him. And they began to understand that where he comes from, when you find food, you better take some with you because you don't know when you're going to get it again. So you keep some back. And he said as a family, it was a huge victory when he stopped taking food from the table. And friends, the sad reality of Israel is that they rarely, if ever, didn't take food from the table. They always had a plan B with God. And as a result of that, how did they look to the nations? No different than them. And God says, that's not my image. My image is someone that will lay it all on the table for me because they know I got their back. And they'll go wherever I tell them to. They'll give whatever I want them to. They're just riding on my shoulders, you know? And so, friend, whatever area of your life isn't that way, it's stopping you from loving the people sitting next to you. It's stopping you from loving your neighbor. Why? Because you're too self-consumed. You're too self-reliant. And as a result of that, the world is imperiled without the gospel because we're doing life our way. And that's not how the system's supposed to work. He's provided everything we need, and this is an experience of it. So let's take it for all it's worth. I'll ask the musicians to come, and then we'll enter into communion.